Hi all, let's have a look at another fascinating encounter from the London Chess Classic. And also, by the way, I'd like to look at the rapid play games after. There were some very interesting games in the super rapid play. But this game was in round 1, Levon Aronian against Michael Adams. Let's have a look what happened. E4, E5. We have actually the Italian game rather than the Spanish game, so the Italian game. We have now the Gyokyo piano, bishop c5. This is by far, I think, the most popular move. Knight f6 comes after it. Actually not that far, there's only about 1,000 game difference. So Gyokyo piano, d3, knight f6, c3. This is a pretty standard move so far. Quite often castling is played here, but in this game, bishop g5, h6, a6, knight bd2, bishop goes back, bishop b3. White is not castling immediately here, you'll note, so he's keeping his options open. Queen e7, and we're kind of out of live book now. For the most part, knight c4. It looks like this plan is basically to pivot the knight around to eye these squares. Bishop e6, knight e3. Now, this might be annoying, and it's actually, looking at these light squares. In fact, black weakens f5 a little bit more with g5, but puts the bishop kind of imprisoned here for the moment. And now Michael Adams, he castles queenside. We have bishop a4, which is an annoying move. Black doesn't really want to end up going backwards to protect the knight. He doesn't want the double pawns, he just actually moves the knight back. Let's have a quick look actually. What are the actual issues? I think on bishop d7, knight d5 becomes more attractive. Let's just for a moment check this position. Actually, it's one of the moves. It's fine actually. I'm not sure this is a big deal. Black actually might be better after that, just taking. So that's fine. Maybe white can just castle. Okay, so there's no issue. That's an alternative. So we see this knight retreat, which is a bit curious, perhaps you could say. Queen c2. And now black plays bishop takes e3. This gives white a certain amount of dynamic potential on the f file, but it is double pawns in the center. However, they do control key squares. It's a very interesting decision for black to do this. Knight h5. You'll note that this is a loose piece on h5 for the moment, and that's not a big deal at the moment, but in variations it can be that are coming up. Bishop f2. But black's idea in playing knight h5 is to support f5, trying to dice up white's pawn structure. And in fact, after e takes, bishop takes, yeah, black has deliberately undoubled the pawns, but is gaining access now to things like e4. We have queen e2, which kind of targets the knight on h5. Now, if black's not careful, it looks very, very tempting to play e4, because you might want to dice up the pawns generally. In fact, there's another tempting move that was played instead, which still kind of dices the pawns. Bishop takes d3. The downside of bishop takes d3 is slight downside. White's given the bishop here, but doesn't matter. It's relying on this fork. Just before we go into this game continuation, if we look at e4, white might actually have not just knight d4, but knight h4 because of the h5 knight. For example, this position, and then we're hitting the loose bishop on f5. This position here is actually, engines seem to think it's slightly better for black here. But the pawns haven't been diced in that scenario. The bishop seems particularly bad on f2 though. There's another scenario where on e4, if we just go back, so e4, knight d4 instead, hitting the knight on h5, bishop g6. This one seems actually more straightforward for black to play because the pawns are getting diced, and it seems, you know, black's got a small advantage. This seems a fine, very fine and nice looking position for black. So yeah, it's interesting. Okay, in the game continuation, another tempting alternative is played, taking here. So it's giving white the bishop here, though. The other slight snag, after queen d4, maybe this was missed actually, it's not with the idea of invading on a7, but if e takes, this would be a mistake. This wasn't played because there's check, winning this knight on h5. So I think it causes a slight concession which wasn't anticipated, perhaps, this loose piece issue. Black plays c5, and this means that this d6 pawn is slightly more vulnerable, which means that the bishop pair might be more useful, potentially. Queen d1, e takes, queen takes, hitting the knight. Knight goes back. And this isn't so bad as actually the variations mentioned with the e4 break. This isn't so bad for white. White has got something going for him, although the knights look pretty strong. They're coming to the centre. They're both quite centralised, the knights. Knight e5 in particular, that one looks impressive. And now queen e6, it looks as though, in fact, if black has his way, if white humbly protects this pawn, it would seem as though Michael Adams would get a great looking position, at least equal with queen g4, because look at this bishop on f2, there's still that issue. There are diced pawns now, and this is like a significant backward pawn on that file. I'm not sure, you know, white doesn't seem that active here. But curiously, maybe to keep some life in the position, in fact, we have, you might consider a very surprising move, bishop g3. Yeah, just giving up the a2 pawn. Yeah, I know it's weird, it's strange, but maybe let's check this position out. Bishop g3 is actually given as one of the top moves to play, rather than king b1. It's actually one of the top moves to play, just giving up the a2 pawn. You might find this very strange, but even okay, in the game continuation, queen takes a2 was played, but even here, the engine session is give up the a2 pawn here. I think there might be something more concrete going on though. Bishop takes, rook takes, and then the king has to take, and then check, and white's getting a load of activity for the a2 pawn. So yeah, it's like, is this a2 pawn poisoned here? The challenge is taken up in this position to take it. If queen g4, white's actually significantly better on queen g4 with queen f1. It seems actually this is approaching winning for some reason. Curiously. I think because the threat is bishop f5. Check, among other things. And if the king moved, well, we lose the knight. And if the knight moves to stop both of those threats, then actually taking here, this is full of venom, isn't it? Rook takes. And now h3, and the knight's pretty loose, it's actually dropping off. So actually it's quite venomous. Bishop g3, it has a lot of subtle venom which really needs to be played out, because yeah, it kind of opens up the f-file possibilities, so including rook f1, loose knight on f6, and weakened light square diagonal kind of highlighted. So yeah, it's an incredible move actually in this circumstance. Queen takes a2 is played, and we do get this f-file pressure, and yeah, but in this position it might be possible to sack the d6 pawn, although it looks entirely an unpleasant thing to do. In the game, knight d5 was played. If here, rook takes d6, this looks really like you wouldn't want to do this with black, but knight c4 hitting the rook and b2. Bishop b1 defending b2, hitting the queen, and this position should be about equal, apparently. So Okay, so knight d5 was played, and white is giving up that bishop, which was pretty bad before, and notice he hasn't got exposure on his back with pawn anymore. So white is giving up a pawn for what exactly here? The light square bishop seems quite good. Black has a bit of pressure to deal with on the f-file and a weakened e-pawn. And this repetition here is not carried on. White actually plays check. And to king b8, queen e4, so that poor e-pawn is targeted. So it seems from a kind of passive looking position, which white could have easily had if he hadn't played bishop g3, he's got, although a pawn down, an active position which is tricky for black to actually handle here. How does black actually handle this position? Can he actually, for example, defend the e5 pawn? Let's have a quick look. Knight b6 was played. Actually, you might think the knight's adequately protected. Can we just defend e5? Let me just see this. Actually, this is given as one of the better moves. I know it's given as equal, but white is a pawn down. So I'll give you an example. This knight b6. So even giving up the e5 pawn like this should be okay. Okay, it's given as equal that. But in the game, actually we have knight b6, queen takes e5 check. And it's unfortunate here that, maybe black earlier had been looking forward to a position where white wouldn't have too much counterplay. But black played a move which kind of encourages a loose piece liability. That b6 knight is currently a loose piece, and it's talked about a lot, especially lower levels, all the time, about how you shouldn't have loose pieces in the position. You should always be checking for loose pieces because they tend to fall off. But here, so that would seem a natural move to remove the loose piece in the position just on general principles. But obviously, the more advanced you get, the more you're kind of liable to break general principles, finding exceptions in positions. And actually, instead of king a7, actually there's a justification why king a7 might not be attractive, because it's going into a pin potentially on queen takes c5. Why not king a8 and then be able to move the knight, say, on queen takes c5, because it's not pinned. So you can see how the nuances of the position. You don't want to go into a pin necessarily. That's another principle. So you've got competing principles. Do you allow a loose piece or do you allow a pin? So this is a quandary. Black played king a8, perhaps not wanting the pin. The thing is, white doesn't have to play queen takes c5, so that benefit is not actually realised. It's actually the other downside on general principles is realised instead here, because white actually didn't take on c5. White actually did exploit the loose piece liability with rook takes d8. This is approaching move 40, kind of where there's time pressure, and there's actually two ways to exploit the loose piece with queen c7 or queen f6. This has been a bad blunder, I think, by Michael Adams standards. One of these can be chosen to actually just win material, although it's not entirely well, it is kind of clear cut in a way, but knight c4 is hitting b2. Queen f6 is played. Adams goes for it now, the king, giving up the rook. How does he actually defend against the double attack on the loose piece? I mean, I've even, the coaching session I gave recently, I've started coaching this year, by the way, and I talk about, don't leave loose pieces lying around. It's just a general principle, but obviously the stronger you get, the more you don't want to be tied down by general principles. But here, how does black actually save, avoid losing material? Yeah, a principle has been broken. There's no way of saving material. Knight c4, unfortunately this is also with check, Okay, so this for the moment this looks very dangerous. This queen and knight combination. In fact, what is the actual threat after that? Does White have to play accurately here? He's just won a rook. Does he have to play accurately? He played actually Queen D3. Actually, I'm pretty sure he does actually have to play very accurately. Queen D3 is one of the more accurate moves because it provides Bishop B1 on Queen A1 check, for example. Let's see if we played a move like just to show the dangers. Queen A1 check is actually better for black because it drags the bishop back first before taking on B2. Then we have knight takes E3 check. Then knight takes G2, knight E3 check. Take this bishop. Yeah, you can see how White's getting mauled and can actually avoid. Doesn't even mate black here after knight C4. This variation shows actually some accuracy is needed because black could end up being better here in this fictional continuation. Loads of pawns for the exchange, but yeah, there's one or two moves which guarantee advantage. The other one is King D1 apparently, but other moves are not guaranteeing an advantage. Rook F2 check. Apparently this is just equal. Check, check. I think there's loads of checks. Maybe it's just like a perpetual check situation or approaching it. Yeah, I mean, there's the hassle's taken out though with Queen D3. This is one of the most powerful moves available to White. So now on Queen A1 check, there's Bishop B1, and on Queen takes B2 check, King D1, and that bishop's protected. What is black doing here? If he takes here, this is not very good to be a rook down here, because I think the check's going to be running out pretty soon. So yeah, Queen D3 kind of signals that this attack is not going to be that great. And in fact, after knight takes B2 being played, yeah, because if we look at the other alternative, which is taking here, that offers black not much. So knight takes is played, and another accurate move, Queen F5, hitting C5 now. Yeah, sorry, Queen F5, King C5, Queen A1 check. There is a check here, King E2, and now black is doomed. Really, he took on C3. Queen takes C5 check. Black's getting mated here or losing the queen. It's cruel, isn't it? Knight B6, take the queen, and if King A at Rook F8 is checkmate. If B6, that's going to be a checkmate in 2 of the check, and Bishop E4, for example. Say like this. Yeah. Yeah, it's now just let's see what was going on in Mike Adams' mind, perhaps, to not have the pin. On Queen takes C5, I think this would have been about this can be equal, this position with, for example, apparently Rook takes D1, Queen A1 check. Now if King D2, Queen takes B2 protects the knight, and if Bishop B1, there is a fork, you see. The knight's not pinned. This could explain. I think we should try and have empathy as far as possible when we use engines to actually try and understand why certain decisions were made. Can you see what black would have in this position, which does offer equality? A nice little tactic actually is available in this position. If I give you 5 seconds, what would you play with black here? Okay, Queen takes B2, and you can see the power of the knight not being pinned, because now we have knight A4 check, knight takes C5, and it's going to be about equal. So chess is an extremely hard game, really. We're trying to balance sometimes, you know, general advice with our specific positions, And it seems, sometimes we play a move which is punished concretely because we ignored a kind of generalization about not having a loose piece. So, but in other positions, not having the pin might have been more important, and you might have been punished concretely for having the pin. So I guess it all comes down to calculation. Our navigational systems are our general rules, but in this game, I think the reason I'm labouring this, I think it's one of the more instructive moments of the game. There was a loose piece earlier which also echoed in some variations, especially that Queen D4 one for Queen G4. It was echoing earlier the loose knight on H5 as well. So you could have argued that the E4 break was stronger than what was played. Bishop takes D3. It seemed fine as well for black, maybe even slightly better. But later the loose piece liability is terminal. But it's the punishment is concrete, not to take on C5, but to take on D8. Actually leaving two loose pieces in effect. So it's a double violation, and it's two ways, in fact, of winning the material with Queen C7 or Queen F6. So yeah, chess is a really hard game, even for super GMs, basically, for this to happen. But even so, even after it seemed quite dangerous with the Queen on A2. Yeah, but very precise moves made sure White wasn't. White was able to overcome the Queen and Knight combination. Yeah, fascinating game. Okay, so comments, questions, likes appreciated. Thanks very much.